So what if I told you there's a predictable six-stage pattern that explains how military superpowers fall apart? A pattern that our source material today says played out for ancient Rome, for France in the 20th century, and for the Soviet Union. And here's the kicker. The claim is that the United States is right in the middle of that exact same pattern right now.
Yeah, that's the central claim we're going to dig into today. It's a thesis that suggests history isn't just rhyming, it's literally repeating, step by step. The stakes? Well, they couldn't be higher. So let's break down the evidence the source presents. Okay, before we even get to the pattern itself, we need to look at the historical case studies that this whole idea is built on. We're talking about three massive empires from totally different eras that all apparently share some kind of fatal connection. So what on earth links them?
First up, Rome. I mean, for 400 years, the Roman legions were the baddest military force on the planet. They were seen as absolutely invincible. But then, bam, the Battle of Adrianople happens. One single crushing defeat. And within a generation, the city of Rome itself was sacked. The military that built an empire was, for all intents and purposes, gone.
Now, let's fast forward about 1,500 years to France in 1940. They had what everyone called the strongest army in Europe, hunkered down behind the supposedly unbreakable Maginot Line. And yet, when Germany invaded, that entire military machine was just obliterated in 6 weeks. A total shocking collapse.
And then you've got the Soviet Union, a nuclear superpower with this gigantic army. They rolled into Afghanistan in '79 expecting it to be a walk in the park. 10 years later, they were limping home in humiliation. And get this, just 2 years after that retreat, the Soviet Union itself just vanished. That military failure set off a complete and total imperial collapse.
Okay, so according to the source, these collapses weren't just random, unlucky events. No, they were the end result of a very specific and repeatable process. A six-stage blueprint for how a military fails. So let's break it down.
At the heart of this whole pattern is a concept called military hollowing out. Think of it like this. It's when a military's actual strength, its training, its gear, the morale of its troops, starts to rot from the inside out. But on the outside, everyone still thinks it's this incredibly powerful force. That growing gap between perception and reality, that's the real weak spot.
And here is the entire sequence, the whole blueprint. It starts at stage 1, when you're at your absolute peak. Stage 2 is when the decline quietly begins on the inside. By stage 3, your reputation is still carrying you, but the reality is you're getting weaker. Stage 4 is that moment of truth, a big defeat that shows the whole world what's really going on. That kicks off stage 5, a domino effect of more defeats and allies jumping ship, until you hit stage 6, where the empire simply can't project power anymore. It's over.
Okay, so this brings us from history to right now. The source takes this six-stage framework and lays it right on top of the United States military. And, well, its conclusion is pretty alarming.
Check this out. Here's how the source maps America's journey onto this pattern. It says 1991, right after the Cold War, that was the stage 1 peak. Stage 2, that internal decline, started around 2005, deep in the long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. By 2020, we were at stage 3. The reputation was holding strong, but the problems were piling up internally. And then, 2021. The source argues the U.S. hit stage 4 with the withdrawal from Afghanistan. 11 days. Just let that sink in. After 20 years and $2 trillion, the Afghan army that the U.S. had spent 2 decades building, it just collapsed in less than 2 weeks. The source uses this number to really drive home not just a failure, but a shockingly rapid and total collapse. So the source material argues this was way more than just a policy failure. It was America's Adrianople moment. Like that Roman defeat. It was the big stage 4 event that shattered the myth of effortless American power and showed the whole world the gap between its reputation and its real-world capabilities. So you have to wonder, right? Was Afghanistan just a one-off thing, a fluke? Or was it a symptom of a much, much deeper problem? Well, the source argues it's definitely the latter. And it points to a whole bunch of internal warning signs, that hollowing out that made the stage 4 failure possible.
And man, the list of these warning signs is pretty long. It's not just one thing. There's a major recruitment crisis. They're missing targets by as much as 25%. The equipment they're using is getting old. The average Air Force plane is almost 30. The Navy's shrinking. Readiness is a huge problem. And that critical tech edge over rivals like China, it's eroding fast. And when you stir in all the internal political divisions, the source says, hey, these are the exact same symptoms we saw in Rome and the Soviet Union.
And to make this really concrete, just look at the Navy. Look at the raw numbers. The U.S. Navy has gone from a high of nearly 600 ships down to around 290. Meanwhile, China has grown its Navy to over 350 ships. That fundamentally challenges America's ability to project power across the globe.
So this all brings us back to that critical gap between reputation and reality. The reputation is still out there. Sole superpower, ironclad security for its allies, unmatched technology. But the reality, according to the source, is that U.S. war games now show potential losses to China, allies are starting to build up their own defenses, and that tech edge isn't so unassailable anymore.
So if the U.S. really is at stage 4, the obvious question is, what happens next? Well, according to the pattern, the answer is stage 5, the cascade of defeats. And the source has a really striking point about the speed at which this can happen.
Take a look at the timeline for collapse after that big stage 4 defeat. For Rome, it took about a century. For France, it took just a year. For the Soviet Union, only 2 years. The point the source is making is that this pattern isn't just repeating, it seems to be accelerating, and dramatically so.
And that leaves us with the final, really provocative thought from this source. If the historical pattern holds true, then a cascade of defeats is what comes after your weakness has been exposed. The question, then, isn't if it happens, but how fast it could all unravel in our modern, hyper-connected world. It's a pretty sobering thought, all based on a pretty stark reading of history.